All right, we've been taking a look at the expected win totals for every single team in the 2025 college football regular season. So far, we've done the SEC and the ACC. We're going to take a look, as you can clearly see, today at the Big Ten. Good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And two, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post pointless, barely watchable college football videos almost every single day of the year. Hit the thumbs up, share the videos out with your friends. I would really appreciate it. All right, let's get into the video here. Regular season win totals for the Big Ten in 2025. Key phrase, regular season. So we're taking a look at the 12 games in the regular season and how many of those games can they win, right? This is a Vegas number. It's a betting number. So you're going to see a lot of like 7.5, 8.5, 9.5. You can't win half a game. We all know that. These are betting numbers. So when you see these numbers, people are betting over or under on these numbers. So what do these numbers really mean? Well, these numbers are just an indication of what the general public feels about a team's chances in 2025. That's it. It clearly doesn't mean they're going to win this amount of games. This is gambling, speculation. That's where these numbers come from. Last year in the Big Ten, we had one undefeated team, 12-0 Oregon. Can they do it again? We're going to find out what the numbers say here in a second. What about Ohio State, the defending national champions? Michigan, big step back last year after winning a national title, but they ended the season on a high note with wins against Ohio State and Alabama in their last two games, Alabama being a bowl game. Indiana surprised a lot of people last year making the playoffs. Will they do it again? We're going to take a look at the numbers. We're going to start right now. We're going to go, looks like in alphabetical order is how they have these listed here. Illinois was another surprise team, I think, last year in the Big Ten. They were borderline playoff team. I think they won 9 games, and we kind of found out last year the way everything shook out. The 9 to 10 win mark was kind of the cutoff for getting into the playoffs or not, right? You had a handful of 9-3 teams that missed out. Illinois was one of them. I believe they were 9-3. Were they 8-4? I think they were 9. Anyway, so we'll see how they're going to do this season. But a lot of people picking Illinois maybe to be this year's Indiana. It's sort of the surprise team out of the Big Ten that finds themselves in the playoffs. Vegas doesn't think so. They have the win total set for Illinois at 7.5. This would be a step backwards, obviously, from what they did last year. And honestly, this number seems a little bit low. I like the coaching staff there. They ended the season on a high note with a win against South Carolina in a bowl game. And you might say, well, South Carolina's no elite team. Well, they were 9-3. They were one of those teams, along with Illinois, Ole Miss, Alabama, whatever. It was kind of on the bubble there at 9-3, sort of knocking on the door of the playoffs and just barely got left out. And that was one of the few bowl games where the majority of players for both teams actually played in that game. That was probably the closest to a quote-unquote real college football game we've seen in a mid-level bowl game in a long time. It was a really good game. Illinois came out on top. This isn't a prediction video. I'm not here to make predictions on Illinois' season, but the number seems a little low to me. If you kind of made me bet $1 right now, I think I'd be leaning over 7.5 wins for Illinois. Indiana, mentioned them a minute ago, surprise team in the playoffs last year. Not expected to make it back. Win total sits at 8.5. Now, they lose a ton of players off of last year's team. They had a first-year head coach who brought in a ton of new players through the portal, and a lot of those players were one-and-done guys. Now, they've hit the portal hard again, and we'll see if Cignetti can kind of repeat his magic. He's a pretty cocky coach, if you've heard him talk before. So I'm sure he expects big things from Indiana again in 2025. According to the Vegas number, the expected win total sits right between 8 and 9 wins at 8.5, which would be another good season for Indiana. I mean, 8-9 wins would be a good year. May not be enough to get them back into the playoffs, which is where they were last year. So maybe you consider that a disappointment versus last season. But this is Indiana we're talking about here. If they can get to the point where they're consistently winning 8 or 9 games, I think that's a big step forward for that program under Cignetti. Iowa, kind of permanently 8-4, really good defense, no offense for what seems like forever. They did make a change at coordinator heading into last season, and I don't know, I guess their offense was a little bit better. Iowa is probably the team that's been hurt the most from doing away with divisions in the Big Ten. Iowa was in the Big Ten West. Wisconsin and Nebraska were kind of struggling around a 7-win mark, and Iowa all seemed like more times than not ended up top of that division over there in the West, or close to the top of the division with around 8 or 9 wins. Now that they've gone away from divisions there, Iowa finds themselves looking up at a handful of teams when it comes to making the Big Ten championship game: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan in most years, things like that. But what's the expected win total for Iowa this coming season? 7.5. That would be a disappointing season for Iowa, I think. They're used to winning sort of 8, maybe 9 games a year, 7.5. So, 7-5, 8-4. Not sure that's the type of season Iowa fans would be wanting to see. Maryland, kind of a forgettable team in the Big Ten to me, and I don't even really mean that in a disrespectful way. There's not too many seasons where you look up at the end of the year and Maryland's sitting there at 2 or 3 losses. Those teams get a lot of attention. Think Florida State last year, right? There's also not a lot of years where you look up at the end of the regular season and you see Maryland sitting at 9 or 10 wins, which those teams also get a lot of attention because they're in the hunt for conference championships and playoffs and things like that in the last month of the season. Maryland kind of just sits right there in the middle. They have a 5 or 6 win season, a 7 or 8 win season. They're never like really, really bad. They're never really, really good. Let's see what Vegas expects from them this coming season. Really, really bad. 4.5 wins. This would be a bad year for Maryland, I think. I don't know. Am I wrong? When I think about Maryland, I think of Maryland as like a 7-win team, 8 in a good year, things like that. I don't know. 4.5 seems pretty low. They must be down bad there. Michigan looking to bounce back after a disappointing 7-5 regular season last year, after, of course, going 15-0 the year before and winning a natty. Jim Harbaugh and company bolted out of town along with a lot of the talent from that team, though. They kind of reset last year. They do have Bryce Underwood coming in at quarterback, which is interesting because when you look at Michigan last year, their quarterback situation was as big of a mess as some of the other notable messes across the country. Oklahoma, Auburn, Florida State. Some of these teams just had disastrous quarterback play. Now, Michigan had good enough talent elsewhere to sort of stay above the 500 mark, finishing the regular season at 7-5. And like I mentioned, beating Ohio State at the end of the regular season and then beating Alabama in a bowl game. Are they set to improve in 2025? This will be Sharon Moore's second year as head coach there, taking over for Jim Harbaugh. Vegas says pretty close to the same, maybe a game or 2 better. 8.5 wins is the expected total for Michigan. This will put them at 8-4, 9-3. Probably not good enough in the Big Ten to get into the playoffs, but maybe. Like I mentioned last year, 10-2 was kind of the cutoff point, but obviously that depends on how many 10-2 teams you have at the end of the regular season and things like that. So I do think it's possible a 9-3 team could get into the playoff. Now, obviously, if a team wins their conference, they're getting in. Clemson last year, right? 9-3 in the regular season, but won the ACC championship game, so got in. But we're talking about at-large bids here. I think it is possible a 9-3 Big Ten or SEC team makes it to the playoffs. I don't know about ACC or Big 12, but I do think a Big 10 or an SEC team at 9-3 could potentially get in if there was an available spot. I can't, in other words, I don't see a 9-3 team jumping ahead of a 10-2 team within the Big 10 or the SEC. Now, the debate would come if you had some kind of like 10-2 Big 12 or ACC team that didn't win their conference versus a 9-3 Michigan team. Would a 9-3 Big Ten team leapfrog a 10-2 team from one of those other conferences? Who knows? Vegas has Michigan at around 8-9 wins heading into next season. Michigan State, 5.5. Boy, they have just been circling the drain for several years now. They hired Mel Tucker. It didn't really work out, honestly. And then, of course, he got ran out of town with a scandal there. They bring in the guy from Oregon State, Jonathan Smith. And I like Jonathan Smith. I think he's a decent head coach. I think he got put in a really bad situation there at Michigan State. Now, 5.5 seems pretty low to me for Michigan State. So without really delving into the schedule and sort of their roster makeup for this coming year, my kind of instinct right now is to think that they probably go slightly over that number, maybe 6 or 7 wins. But 5.5 is what Vegas has them sitting at heading into the season. Minnesota, 6.5. Again, these teams just got completely wrecked by the disintegration of divisions within the Big Ten. Minnesota, Northwestern, Iowa, these were teams that, every 2 or 3 years you'd look up at the end of the year and they'd be sitting there at 9 wins. And because they were in the West, that was good enough to get into the Big Ten title game over an 11-1 Ohio State or 10-2 Penn State or whoever it happened to be. And now that the divisions are gone, that's just no longer the case. But according to Vegas anyway, it doesn't really matter. Minnesota not expected to get anywhere close to 9 or 10 wins this season. The over-under for Minnesota sits at 6.5. Nebraska finally made the bowl game, a bowl game last year for the first time in almost a decade under head coach Matt Rule. His 3rd year now, I believe. Dylan Raiola started as a true freshman last year and, kind of went as expected, some highs, some lows. You would expect some improvement just like you would from any quarterback in year 2. Nebraska, though, sitting at a win total of 7.5. So looks like another basically borderline bowl season for Nebraska, at least according to the early indications and the expected win number here at 7.5 out of Vegas. Northwestern, 3.5 wins. I just 3.5 wins for Northwestern. Okay, there you move on. Ohio State. Ohio State, national champions last year, despite the fact that they lost not one but two regular season games within the conference. Didn't even play in their conference championship game. Oregon and Penn State played in the Big Ten Conference Championship game. Ohio State had beat Penn State in the regular season, lost to Oregon and Michigan in the regular season, then just absolutely obliterated Oregon in that Rose Bowl playoff game. And went on to win the national title over Notre Dame. And they're expected to compete to do it again. The highest win total we've seen so far in the Big Ten, 10.5 wins for Ohio State. As a comparison to some other teams and other conferences that we've already looked at just off the top of my head, with like ACC or SEC in particular, no team in the SEC had an expected win total of 10.5. Not a single one. There were 4 at 9.5, including Texas, who Ohio State plays in week 1 at home in Columbus. So Ohio State expected to have a better record, at least according to these win total numbers in April, than any team in the SEC, an expected win total of 10.5 for the defending national champion, Ohio State Buckeyes. Oregon, 10.5. Again, right there with Ohio State at 10.5. They won the Big Ten last year, their first year in the league. Now, they went 12-0 in a regular season last year, the only team in the country to go 12-0, the only Power 4 team to go 12-0. Made the Big Ten title game, beat Penn State, had a bye in the first round of the playoffs, and then, like we mentioned, just got buzzsawed by Ohio State out there in the Rose Bowl. But they're expected to compete not only for the Big Ten, but for a playoff spot and a potential national championship again in 2025. Their win total sits at 10.5. Dan Lanning got that thing running like a well-oiled machine up there. Penn State made the playoffs last year because it expanded to 12 games. Now, they would have made the playoffs a ton of times in the last 10 years if it had been at 12 teams the entire time. They're like perennially 10-2, it seems like. They did make the Big Ten championship game last year. And even though they lost that game to Oregon, by the way, and I know I've mentioned this several times on this channel in the last 4 months, that's the best game I've seen Penn State play in a long, long time, was that loss to Oregon. If you go back and you look at a lot of Penn State's big games against the Ohio States, the Michigans, whatever it happens to be in the regular season, they tend to lose those games. But they tend to lose those games and score 10 points. Like, just no offense at all. Their offense looked better against Oregon in that loss in the Big Ten championship game than I've seen their offense look in a long, long time. They went on to win a playoff game before getting ousted by Notre Dame. Right? Notre Dame beat them in the playoff. The Orange Bowl, I believe that was. So a good season for Penn State. Can they repeat that? Could they improve on that? Vegas says yes, 10.5. So they've got the same expected win total as Ohio State and Oregon. So a clear hierarchy here within the Big Ten when it comes to the expected wins in the regular season, with Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon all sitting at 10.5 wins. A handful of teams below that in the 7, 8, 9 win range. But those three clearly at the top, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State, at least according to early numbers out of Vegas. Purdue, 3.5 wins. One of the worst teams on the planet last year, them and Florida State. I would have loved to have seen them Purdue play Florida State last year in like the Embarrassment Bowl, or like, the loser has to disband their program for 5 years or something just out of shame. These were just two horrific teams, Purdue and Florida State. Florida State's win total this season, I believe, is 7.5. So they're expected to get somewhat better. Purdue, no. 3.5 wins. Wow, that would be terrible again. UCLA, 4.5 wins. They have really fallen off in the last few years. It seemed like they were ascending. I don't mean ascending towards national titles, but they seemed a little respectable, I guess, under Chip Kelly. They were recruiting well. They signed Dante Moore to quarterback. Things looked like they were kind of headed in the right direction. Chip Kelly leaves to become the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Dante Moore transferred to Oregon, where he'll be the starting quarterback this year. And what does that leave you with? A win total of 4.5 for UCLA. And I'm going to be honest, this just seems extremely low to me. And again, without diving into the schedule and who they play and where they play them and all those kinds of things, and the non-con schedule, and taking a look at the roster, my gut tells me they can win more than 4.5 games. So again, force me to bet $1 on this right now. I'm taking over 4.5 on UCLA. Southern Cal, one of the most disappointing teams in the Power 4 over the last 4 or 5 years. Lincoln Riley, well, he doesn't know what he's doing. The defense is terrible every year. They can't get out of their own way. I I don't think Lincoln Riley's going to be there for long. We'll see. Vegas has them at 7.5 wins, which would be about what they did last year. Weren't they 7-5 last year, something like that? And honestly, that to me, it seems like that's kind of the type of program Southern Cal is right now, a 7 or 8 win team. I don't consider Southern Cal to be anywhere close to Ohio State, Oregon, or Penn State. Now, does that mean there's no way they could beat any of those teams? No. We see weird things happen in college football all the time. I'm talking more of a overall thing, fast forwarding to the end of the season. I don't see a scenario where Southern Cal has won enough games to be lumped up at the top of the Big Ten with those 3 teams, even if they have the ability maybe to beat one of them on a random Saturday. This seems about right to me for a Southern Cal team that's really just treading water right now. Washington, I think Washington's going to be an improved team this year. They took a massive step back last year, obviously. They made the playoffs 2 years ago, but then not only did Kalen DeBoer leave, but they lost like 20 of their 22 starters or something from that team, either to the NFL, graduation, or transfer portal. So, anybody that didn't expect them to take a step back last season, I think, was being unrealistic. Now, I like their coach, and I think they can take a pretty significant step forward this year. What does Vegas think? Do they agree with Uncle Lou? 7.5 wins. I think they can probably do better than that. I think Washington can get to 8 wins and have a pretty good year. Wisconsin, massive year for Luke Fickell. This has been one of the biggest disappointing hires to me of the last decade. I was extremely high on Luke Fickell and what he did at Cincinnati, and I thought he would be a great fit at Wisconsin. He comes in there, he said all the right things, in my opinion, modernized the offense. We got to start throwing the ball more. It has not worked. In the last 30 years, basically, Wisconsin has 5 seasons of 7 wins or less. 3 of them are under Luke Fickell in the last 3 years. It is unacceptable for a team or a program like Wisconsin to be averaging 7 wins a season. They averaged 10 wins from 2000 to 2021. They averaged 10 wins a year. Now they've won 7 games 3 years in a row. This is a make it or break it year, I think, for Luke Fickell. How does Vegas think Wisconsin will do? I'm going to tell you something right now. If they don't go over that number, Luke Fickell needs to be out of a job. It is mind-boggling that Wisconsin can be a 5-win team to me, or even a 6-win team. I don't care about the schedule. I don't care about adding Oregon to I don't care about any of that. Maybe instead of winning 10 games, they're winning 9. But you're telling me the over-under for Wisconsin in 2025 is 5.5 wins in year, 4 now for Luke Fickell? This is unacceptable. And again, apparently I was wrong. I thought Luke Fickell would work out there. I thought it was a great hire. This guy, he's not done anything there. If they come anywhere close to this win total, 4, 5, 6 wins, they got to go a different direction. He's got to be out of a job. If all he's going to do there is win 6 or 7 games, I don't know why he's got the job. They would have to get rid of him. We'll see. What do y'all think about Wisconsin? They're going to go over that number? That's atrocious. That's absolutely atrocious. All right, that's it. So we've done the SEC, the ACC, and now the Big Ten. The only one left to do would be the Big 12. We'll do that one tomorrow. Appreciate you watching. Let me know down below what you think about those numbers. Is there some that stand out to you as being way too low? Is there a team that stands out to you as being way too high? If you had to just pick one of those teams to bet on, which one would it be? Would you take the over on what team and the under on what team? Let me know down below. Appreciate you watching, though. Be sure to hit the thumbs up, share the video with your friends, subscribe if you're new. And most importantly, have a good morning.